everyone. Welcome to the next edition of Resilient Lincolnshire. I wanted to take this opportunity to welcome you all to my talk this morning. Wherever you are in the world or in the UK, I hope you're keeping well, safe, and healthy at this time and managing with homeschooling, working in your kitchens as I am right now, and so forth. I really do appreciate you guys taking the time to join me today. I am particular because I'm going to talk about something that is very close to my heart and a passion of mine, and that is the industry of aviation. And in particular, I want to talk about aviation in a post-COVID-19 world, hence my title, Aviation Flying Off Course. Before I begin on this particular topic and the discussion today, I just wanted to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Farhan Ahmed. I'm head of school for marketing, languages and tourism within the Lincoln International Business School. And I'm also postgraduate dean for the University of Lincoln as well. So what do I want to do in the next half an hour? Well, for the next 15-20 minutes, I want to take your time, if I may, to talk about aviation and how it's been impacted by COVID, and then look at what aviation will look like once we move beyond and into a recovery phase and start to, hopefully, fingers crossed, engage in more travel and what that experience will essentially feel like for us. Now, as per all the other talks that you've had in this series, your engagement would be very much appreciated. So if you've got any questions, any queries whatsoever, please use the chat function, ask anything you wish, and I will either answer them as they pop up, or I'll most certainly come back to them in the last 10 minutes of my talk this morning. Okay, so let's start off by talking about aviation, and let's start by looking at what the industry looks like at the present time. Now, as you can imagine, this is a very, very fluid situation. If you're watching the news, as I am on a daily basis, reading various news outlet websites, aviation is in there on a daily basis, whether it be we are seeing aviation being mentioned, discussed, debated in many cases is fluid, and it is changing almost on an hourly basis. The context and to put into numbers to a certain extent what has happened to the industry in the last 12 weeks as such, since we've been on lockdown, and to a certain extent slightly before that. And I've been looking at a number of barometers, and whether you look at any barometer, is that aviation has seen a significant, and in my opinion, a once in a lifetime downturn in terms of reduction in passenger numbers, reduction in freight, reduction in passenger kilometers as well, for example. So let me give you a bit of an insight into those numbers, because if you're a data-orientated person such as myself, these hit home very hard. And whilst they're data, we need to remember that there is a human side to this as well. So whilst the data has shown a significant downturn, there is a human situation behind that. People are losing jobs, people are being furloughed, people are unsure as to where their careers will go, hopefully, when we come out on the other side of this. One of the key indicators that I like to look on is year upon year change. And the key indicator I always like to look at is world passenger traffic. Why? Because it's a great indicator of how much you and I travel on a yearly basis. And probably the most stark figure that's hit me is up until April, May 2020, we have seen a reduction in passenger traffic number worldwide by 52%. That is astonishing, a halving of passenger numbers. Projections show that if we continue to go in the direction that we are, by the end of this month and into July, we will be up to a reduction in 80% of world passenger traffic. These are outstanding numbers in the sense that I've never seen a reduction in these sorts of passenger traffic numbers in my career. And like I say these are numbers that we have hardly seen ever in the industry. Even when you look back at key events such as 9/11, such as the last pandemic of SARS, never have we seen anything like this. Looking at the other side of things, capacity-wise, we're down again. We're expecting this to fall even further. We're expecting this to hit around about 80% by the end of June, capacity-wise, in terms of what is being offered by the airlines. This is an indicator of how worried the airlines are. They are having to retract very quickly in terms of the number of seats they offer, and that is a worrying sign for us as passengers. But the crazy numbers when you look at them. Interestingly, we know that passenger numbers are very interestingly, that is down by 15% at the moment, which might not seem much compared to passenger traffic, but actually in the world of freight, 15% is a significant drop. And that is actually a cause to worry about at the present stage, because as you can imagine, we can continue to operate freight traffic due to the no issue of passengers, but seeing that being reduced is a worry as well from the industry perspective. And then finally, I just wanted to highlight what's going on in the world's airports at the moment. And probably the most significant two pieces of facts I can give you on this from an aviation perspective is that the world's top 15 airports have all reported a decline in aircraft departures. That is an indicator of how we are reducing the number of operations that are taking place at the moment. And in some cases, many of the world's top 15 airports have reported that they are down as a collective by 49 to 55% in terms of passenger numbers. And this is seeing traffic reduced, not only at the world's major hub airports, but also transit airports as well. And that is a worrying sign indeed. And for the first time in decades and decades, as far as my living memory goes back, we have no Chinese airports in the top 15 world airports in terms of passenger departures and passenger numbers. That is an indicator of how significantly down we are. So now that we know what the industry is looking like in terms of data, and we can quite clearly see the situation is desperate and in many cases being described as dire by many of the world's experts, it's quite clear we are in a difficult situation. And as I said at the start of my talk, whilst we talk about these numbers being unprecedented, we do need to remember that behind these statistics, there are human lives and human costs associated with this. People being furloughed, people being made redundant, people still unsure as to what will happen with their respective job, whether that be in an airline, an airport, or a service provider linked to either one of those. So we do need to bear that in mind. What I wanted to move on to, now that we know that the situation is dire, is to focus on how the industry will look when we start to move forward. And you would have noticed that there are now starting to be some baby steps in terms of the industry moving forward, whether that be increased numbers of flights, whether that be increased numbers of passengers to a certain extent, starting to slowly are fourfold today. And I'm going to focus on these 4 points because I think it's what passengers need to hear and what they need to be prepared for to a certain extent as we go forward. Okay, so I'm going to go through those in highlight look like post-COVID. The first point I want to highlight, and the first area I want to highlight in terms of how the industry will look when we move into this new era, will be this absolutely key. And the reason I start off with this is because a recent IATA survey, the International Air Transport Association, indicated that 14% of passengers said they would not resume air travel once the restrictions were lifted because of concerns they had over their personal health. Now, this is a worrying fact because if regular travelers are now concerned about returning to air traffic and returning to traveling, that is a worry from an airline and airport perspective. And we need to reassure passengers that the industry as a whole is working very quickly towards maintaining and safeguarding passenger health when they resume flying. So how are they doing this, and how can we restore traveller confidence? Well, there are a number of initiatives that are being presently implemented, presently trialed, which will allow the industry to be a bit more safer and allow for that opportunity for people to travel without fearing for their health. Now, this includes a number of initiatives. Global airlines, global airports are working on this as we speak. For example, health screening facilities is the first, making sure that passenger temperatures are taken, making sure that there are firewalls in place where passengers feel like that they are being safeguarded. And this essentially begins with health screening, ensuring that facilities at airports are made as contactless as they possibly can be. Now, we have to maintain at the back of this thought process that aviation is very much a security orientated industry, and safeguarding the safety of passengers is key. Therefore, how can we manage that whilst also making sure that we try to maintain safety levels at what they were previously, but try to make them as seamless and, to a certain extent, contactless as possible? Now, this is already happening. We are starting to see certain airports allowing passengers to process through the airport to their respective flight without having to interact essentially with any other human being from the air side through to the land side and onto the aircraft itself. These initiatives will start to gather pace a lot quicker now, in my opinion, as we start to come out of restrictions. And I think these are needed. So from a passenger perspective, let me reassure you, lots is being done to make sure your safety is maintained. And personally, I think airlines will now begin to reassure passengers a lot more through targeted marketing campaigns so that passengers are aware of exactly how their health is being safeguarded. Looking ahead, though, from a passenger viewpoint, what would happen in the event of a second wave? And we do need to bear this in mind. And to keep passengers and airlines and the associated facilities reassured, once again, airlines and airports are making sure that the industry is prepared for a second wave, and not only prepared for a second wave, but also prepared to keep flying and keep passengers moving when that second phase happens without having to completely reduce operations. And again, this will be making sure that passengers are able to put through airports and onto their aircraft without having any real interaction with individuals. So now that we know that we have to reassure passengers going forward as to what is the best way to move forward in terms of reassuring them of their health, in terms of not only reassuring passengers, but also of the in-flight experience. And the second point I want to highlight to you all right now is how we can think about what our in-flight experience will be, because it won't be what it was before. Okay. And if you look on any news article that we've seen thus far, you will notice that there are a multitude of suggestions being made as to what the in-flight experience will be. There are most recently rumors of shields being packed amongst passengers. Now, this is absolutely key because, yes, the first part of the journey is important in terms of processing through airports, but we need to make sure that we are also able to maintain safety standards on board. And many airlines are now doing this proactively. Etihad, for example, has just very recently introduced a new role within their in-flight experience, that being of well-being ambassadors, these being employees of the airline that are essentially responsible of maintaining the well-being of passengers on board, and that is their sole function. We've also noticed that some airlines are becoming quite innovative in this in-flight experience by giving passengers the opportunity to purchase multiple seats on board aircrafts. So, for example, in China, there are now examples of certain airlines allowing passengers to buy up to 8 seats so that they are able to create an environment of social distancing around themselves. This is absolutely key in order to facilitate a safe and enjoyable in-flight experience. In addition to that, there are a multitude of thoughts that are being given to in-flight catering, for example, and how this would work and how passengers to a certain extent would be able to do that without compromising their experience. So all of these things are being thought of as we speak. The second point I wanted to highlight very quickly in terms of how a post-COVID aviation industry will look like is in terms of what airlines will look like, in terms of competition, in terms of pricing and so forth. As you can imagine, the industry at the moment is seeing a number, and this is a very sad situation, of airlines sadly having to reduce operations significantly, or in some cases having to completely fold completely. Okay, for example, we've seen a number of other low-cost airlines that also seen a number of how is this going to develop. Okay, essentially airlines will now be forced into, to a certain extent, making sure that they operate together to a certain extent. And this is important because in order to safeguard an industry, one airline cannot be seen as taking advantage of the situation. So I think this is where passengers will notice much more of a collegiate approach amongst full cost, low cost airlines and how they can manage that particular process going forward. And that will be important because not only will airlines need to work together to ensure passengers are safe and that everything is working well, but we are also going to have to make sure that prices are not taken advantage of by certain airlines and that the availability of seats is made available to passengers as well. So I think from a competition viewpoint, we are going to see changes. We are suddenly going to lose airlines, but those airlines that do survive will have a social responsibility, in my opinion, as well as a personal responsibility to ensure that they do not take advantage in any shape or form of their passengers. Thirdly, I wanted to highlight a point which is very interesting and interestingly, an unexpected element of the debate. What would the industry look like post-COVID in terms of its environmental viewpoint? And this is something that I've noticed being debated a lot more in not only the aviation forums and media, but I've been seeing it noted in the viewpoints of the passengers as well. What is aviation doing at this stage to essentially increase or accelerate its journey to being much more of a environmentally friendly industry? Now, there are a number of strategies being implemented at the moment, but I think one thing that passengers will see is there will be much more of a increased effort in terms of passengers noticing that aviation will be much more environmentally sensitive in terms of passengers. I just wanted to focus on was the issue of the aviation industry and how it will look and feel in comparison to other industries. And the key thing I want to focus on here is, and this is more of a point for the general traveling public, is it will not be what it was before. And that is something passengers need to acknowledge. Yes, or that they take care of their passengers in a safe, efficient, and professional manner. But I think the experience that we have become accustomed to. Okay. And as a result of that, we as passengers have a responsibility to adapt, as well as the airlines and airports having to innovate. And that is something we need to take on board as we look forward. So based on those 4 points, I wanted to focus very much on the passenger side of things, because I'm very conscious of the fact that to a certain extent, passengers are the key focus of how the aviation industry will recover in the future. One point I want to make for colleagues and aviation professionals watching this is I am very conscious of the fact that this is a very difficult time for everyone. And there is a whole lot of uncertainty at the present time. I think the one thing we can take as a glimmer of hope or a green shoot looking ahead is people will travel. Despite the reports that people are nervous, despite the fact that there are different stages of COVID in different parts of the world, inevitably, as a global society, we have to travel for cultural reasons, education reasons, health reasons, and so forth. Therefore, there will always be a market for aviation. There will always be a substantial number of us who need to travel and travel multiple times, not only for leisure purposes, but for business purposes as well. And based on that, if you are a professional within the industry and you are concerned about the way it will look like in the future, rest assured, with positive steps towards innovation and implementing innovative changes that will allow us to survive this period, we will see passengers return. And it is a matter of getting to that point where passengers are able to feel reassured to travel again and feel safe in doing so. So I do hope that is a few words of reassurance to colleagues within the industry. And I also hope that the points that I've raised in terms of passengers is something that is an indication of what the industry will look like in the future. So I'm very conscious that I've been speaking now for about 20 minutes, and I'm very keen to make sure that there is engagement within this talk. So as a result of that, I am more than happy to take questions at this time. I'm just having a look at the live comments that are coming through. Apologies if I mispronounce your name or anything like that. What is causing freight traffic reductions of 15%? This will no doubt impact the economy when goods are no longer available to purchase. That is very good. Traffic is, we need to keep in mind that there are two ways in which freight travels around the world. They are sole freight traffic operators, i.e. aircrafts that only take freight traffic. And then there are passenger aircrafts that also take freight with them in their hold when we travel with fee-paying humans. The reduction of 15% is probably a reduction which is about right in light of the fact that we've seen a reduction in passenger traffic. And therefore, because there are no flights at the moment, or a vast reduction of flights at the moment, which have, in terms of passenger flights, that is where we're seeing a reduction in freight traffic more so than the sole freight aircrafts that take freight from point A to point B. I think once we start to see an increase in the number of passenger flights, we will naturally see an increase in the number of freights being carried as well, purely because they go in the hold of the aircraft when we take passengers from A to B. So, all being well, we should see an improvement in freight traffic. To come back to the second point of your question, no doubt this will have an issue for the economy in the long term. Yes, no doubt. The quicker we can get aviation moving back to what was its traditional numbers, the better that will be for the economy, because that is how we get goods and services in and out of our, and it comes back to my point of the economy again. It will get the economy moving. And likewise bring them inbound, we will essentially get the economy moving as a result of that. So I hope that helps to answer the first question, which was from Trackfield Tars. Second question is, What are your views on the quarantine period imposed by the UK for all travelling individuals to the UK? It's a very interesting debate. Now, whilst I want to get involved in the political debate, I am very much on the side of the airlines and the airports. Personally, I think in order to get the economy moving, in order to allow for passengers to help reignite and re-engage and help the aviation industry to recover, we need to do something about the quarantine period. Purely because by having a 14-day quarantine period, which started this past Monday, the 8th of June, we are effectively reducing the number of people that might potentially travel in to the UK. And I know there are exemptions to that from particular countries, such as the Republic of Ireland and so forth. I do feel, whilst maintaining the health of individuals in the country, obviously, we do need to review that quarantine period. And I'm not saying that we need to completely eradicate it, but I think 14 days is an awfully long time and will naturally have an adverse impact on the industry. Looking further along in terms of the questions, would consumers be prepared to pay more for extra seats to keep themselves safe? I think that will happen. And I've used the example of an airline in China, which is at the present time offering the opportunity for passengers to buy multiple seats, up to 8 seats, for a reduced rate in order to allow for there being social distancing. And I think given the opportunity, if airlines said to passengers that you are able to buy 1 or maybe even 2 seats on each side of you for a reduced rate, I think passengers would be willing to make that additional payment in order to maintain social distancing on board. I think that will have to be accompanied with other measures, because I strongly feel that passengers would want airlines to be making proactive steps to safeguard the safety of their passengers. So I think if there was steps being implemented by airlines as well as initiatives for passengers to take, then I think that would most certainly happen in the industry, and passengers will be happy to play their role within that. So I think that's an interesting one. I'm just having a look at the additional questions that are coming as well. Just looking at the additional questions. Travel only for the rich. That is very interesting. Potentially, yes, but I think this is where airlines would need to be, and if they were to offer additional seats in order to allow an environment around passengers to make it those additional seats at a vastly reduced rate, so that the average passenger would be able to afford it. In addition, important to realize as well. In just a couple of other points that I just wanted to mention before I bring this talk to a close, whilst I wait for more questions to come in, is to bring things to a natural close. I think the one thing I would like to say to everyone watching this today is aviation is absolutely critical in terms of being an industry that drives economic activity. And that has hopefully come out in my talk today. It's most certainly come out in the questions. And because it's an absolutely critical industry, which drives the economy to a certain extent, I am going to make a comment that I do feel that the industry should be given support from governments. I also feel that airlines that have ownership structures which are completely private need to be given a support by the government as well, because those are the airlines that are struggling the most at the moment. If you notice, and if you look at the analysis, airlines which have partial government ownership are those that are likely to survive the greatest. So if you look at that analysis, I see no reason why private airlines or airlines that are not government owned wouldn't be given government subsidies of some shape or form. And I notice in recent government reports Certain airlines have already been given support, and they need more. So I'm strongly a believer in the fact that the industry is so crucial to our economic activity that it is vital that we see some form of support being provided. So based on the questions that I've got, I can't see any more coming in my list. I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank you all very much for joining me this morning. And I hope you found this to be of use. If you have any questions, any queries following this talk, please do not hesitate to contact me at all. I'm more than happy to communicate with you. In the meantime, though, I wish you a very pleasant day, and I hope you all stay well and healthy in the longer term as well. Thank you for your time, and take care.